You are live.
Great. This is transportation back from our break. We're going to talk about the Twin States Clean Energy Link, not the whole project, but specifically the project's connection to our state highways. So we're going to hear from Rob White first about that, and we're going to hear from people representing the project. So Rob, just go ahead and tell us what you know about this. Not
everything. For the record, I'm Robert White. I'm the Project Delivery Bureau Director at the Agency of Transportation. So first, let me just talk about the specifics of that piece that's in Vermont. There's a piece in New Hampshire as well, as you sort of alluded to.
You haven't budgeted the revenue like you did with the Lake Champlain proposal, have you?
We can't talk about the budget.
Oh, you can't talk about the budget. Did you remember that? I said, I don't think that's a sure deal. We're optimistic.
You're CFO.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Ancient history.
So this project comes into Canaan, Vermont on 141 from Canada. Travels along 141 for just a short distance, then onto Route 114, and then ultimately gets on 102, which it stays on for quite a distance down to the Guildhall-Lancaster crossing. And then goes along Route 2 for a short distance along the river, and then ultimately crosses somewhere in the Lunenburg-Dalton area. So it's about 60 to 70 miles long in the highway right of way during that section.
50 to 70?
50 to, I'd say 60 to 75 miles. It's a 1,200 kilowatt, 1,200 megawatt line that is ultimately aiming to get into New Hampshire to a transfer station down there. So anyways, we have a monthly meeting with National Grid on the project. Right now they're doing a lot of the exploratory work along those corridors just to see, wetlands, archaeology, all sorts of different things. And they have been getting 1111 permits through us to do that work, and they're out there now.
And the proposal is to use a highway right of way. Is that
correct? For a buried transmission line.
All right. Okay. So it's all on state right of way until it crosses into New Hampshire?
I believe the majority of it is. There's a short section that I believe is on town highway, and then I don't know how they get off that town highway and cross the lake to get into New Hampshire. There are some bridge crossings. There is one in Gilman at the Dalton area. I would assume maybe that is where the crossing is, but the majority of it is in state highway right of way.
And that power that's proposed to go through there is 3 times the amount of what Yankee is.
Oh, it's a major Hydro-Quebec generation?
I believe so.
That's for the generation.
And at one time they were talking about, and I'm sure that Mr. Coleman will talk about it, but there's also bidirectional where it could come the other way. If there was too much offshore wind coming, it could go north.
Correct. And so we meet with them monthly, and we are at the stage where, like I mentioned, they're doing exploratory work. They have an 1111 permit with us. They're looking to get a couple more 1111 permits because they have some other activities that are coming in to look at that. We have a draft lease that hasn't been presented to them yet, and we have draft lease values that haven't been presented to them as of yet either. But we're hoping to actually do that this week.
And I'm assuming since you had a signed lease deal with other uses of right of ways, that is there like a formula that the agency uses for right of way, whether it be a transmission line or I assume there's other uses of right of way than transmission lines, but I can't think of one right now.
Yes, we did have another energy. It was actually much like this project. That we had an option with them. We ultimately had an appraisal based on their project and came up with some values, and then we ultimately negotiated a deal for that one. We are using some of that same information to basically calculate the value for this one.
Okay. And do you have a natural gas using But is there anywhere where the natural gas lines are using state right away? So you're paying a lease payment, do you know?
I'm not aware of any longitudinal installations. There may be some crossings, but generally we're not charging for crossings.
Yeah. Okay.
I like Portland Gas. I wonder, that must cross some,
It's got to.
it's got to, as it
Matter
comes
of
up.
fact, I think there's crossing up around that
Yeah.
Lunenburg,
Yeah.
Lancaster area,
And what time?
I don't know.
As it
what's the
crosses
bar-
into Lancaster, actually.
just south of the bridge crossing, I believe.
Portland, yeah, that comes up through Barton.
I actually, as a 15-year-old, and long story, but I actually sprayed chemical on that from the Canadian border all the way down to Lancaster. With a company, it was actually Asplin that did that, so we actually, walked the whole length of that. So, yeah, and I can remember when we finished, and that's right.
So they've kept the ground clear.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not using it right now.
No, they're still using it,
Oh, they are.
and they're still using it, and they still have
So-
do that application.
Obviously, we're hearing some things in terms of how effective the state is in representing the state interests.
Yep.
And, a colleague of ours said we do a great job of buying high and selling low, so we don't negotiate as effectively as we might. But the other part is, in fact, if there is what would be the responsibility if there is damage to the roadbed, maintenance, et cetera, the extent to which you have that. What's in the lease is gonna be so important, and that's part of the concern, and I guess probably Senator Ingalls has had more discussion in terms of what some of those issues are raised. I think also, in terms of the conduit and the casing and public safety and so forth, and would that be in your lease as well?
Yeah, most of those details are in the lease. We're always concerned about the impacts, not only to the infrastructure as it sits, but when we come through with projects, any interference.
Right.
There are other things in the right of way. This corridor is fairly rural. There's not a lot there, but there definitely could be other things. Matter of fact, the pipeline that we're mentioning crosses. I'm not sure the depths, whether there would be some sort of a interaction between those two facilities or not, but those are in the lease. I believe I've taken a look at the draft lease that actually comes from the prior project. I think there is some work to be done maybe on better clarifying some of that, but there's even information in there about abandonment, when this project is done, because they do have a lifespan. I think the lease is generally for 40 years. What's the rules of an abandonment? Do they need to do anything? Do we need to do anything? Who's going to pay for it? Things of that nature. So we're definitely looking at that. It's a big concern of ours.
Do you have a question? No. So that's just ongoing procedures that you're having with the issue. Well, it's good to know that you're using that other, because it seemed like what the other project was offering was from my perspective, but not having really anything compared to that, it was a healthy payment. And I wanted to just to make sure that they were using that as a benchmark in the negotiation.
Yes, definitely using that as a benchmark. And yes, the values are much greater than we've ever seen in a lease for the use of the right of way, because this is, a critical
So
project.
you're using a consultant to help you in the, with this as well. I mean, it's sort of like writing a contract, and you do contracts all the time, but we certainly know how they're constructed, what the, provisions are, enforceability and so forth are really critical and takes a lot of expertise and gets into, I'm sure you have your legal counsel.
Yeah, we're definitely working closely with the AG's office. We're not using a consultant for this one. When we had the appraisal written for the prior project, we actually had some forethought about other projects coming along and other.
What was the other project?
TDI was
The New England Clean Power Line, it's a similar name. That was down Lake Champlain and then it crossed over to the Coolidge substation. So
That never took.
never happened, yeah.
Yeah, well,
But
that's
it's
what I
just-
was, but AOT
That was the one they
budgeted the
booked.
revenues.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, okay, I was thinking of something else.
No, that one.
No, that's, okay.
Which I looked at the order, it was like $211 million over several years.
Yeah, so that project, you know, was, I think, basically permitted, and they signed off on an option with us to enter into this lease agreement within the next 2 years, you know, and they were going for funds through the Department of Energy. And actually that project and this project were going for funds as well. The TDI project did not get selected in the last round, and this project did. But when we did that appraisal, we asked for it to also look at other types of uses of the right of way, whether it was telecommunications or towers or whatever else. And they projected those values over a period of time. And I don't remember the final year, but I think we're only about halfway through what that projected. Of course, a few things have changed, you know, in the past few years with inflation and stuff. But so we do have some values that are, you know, prorated out or adjusted out.
It would at least have an escalator to it. That'd be normal.
It does have an escalator. Yep. Yep. It starts off, like I said, it would be a 40-year lease or 50 if they want. But it'd basically be a 40-year lease with a starting value and an annual increase.
So where the right of way would be, it wouldn't disturb the roadbed or anything like that, or would it? And so that you, well, maybe crossing, but would there be any costs associated with the existing the three routes that you were talking about?
Well, generally, we haven't seen a detailed route yet, but I would say that it's going to be, you know, somewhere off the edge of pavement,
Right.
depending on, you know, what's out there. As I said, it's fairly rural up in that area. There's a lot of places where the wood line is fairly close to the edge of the road. But generally, it would be off the edge of pavement. As you mentioned, if there's crossings, they would probably have to cut the pavement or directional bore or
But
something
otherwise
like that.
not disrupt the pavement.
Correct.
And road surface.
Correct.
Because you had that.
What is the width of the requested right of way?
I would guess that the right of way up through there is generally a 3-rod right of way. There may be some variations, you know, where we did
That's
some.
your right of way, but you're asking how much they need for their.
Yeah.
Oh, how much they need. I don't believe, and probably the folks that are on here can talk about that a little better than I can, but I don't believe their disturbance area is that large.
So what it is, and again, we're gonna talk about it, but from what we've been told, that it's a concrete encasement, but then every like 15 or 2,000 feet, there's actually a place where there will be like a manhole cover to where you can go down in through into a box culvert type thing and below the frost grade. And but so those will be bigger, I'm sure, but for the most part, it's a concrete trench.
Yeah, I just don't know how wide.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And I have a meeting at 1:15, so.
Okay, well, I think we're done with Rob, unless you have anything else or any questions for Rob, and then we can move to Warren and Orlando. There's Warren. Looks like he's in an airplane hangar.
I know.
Good morning. Good morning. You want to go first, Warren?
Sure, I appreciate it. I'll see if I can share my screen and throw up a few PowerPoint slides. I have Orlando Martinez with me. There he is on screen. Orlando is the project expert. He's in charge of managing the project. So a lot of the technical questions that you were discussing with Rob, Orlando's prepared to go through. I'm going to give you an overview of the project. I've talked with Senator Ingalls and Senator Kitchell over probably the past several months about the project. But for the benefit of the committee, I'll give you an overview of the project and then turn it over to Orlando. We also have some slides that will give you illustrations of the constructions or the cross section of the trench and so forth. And I think he can. He's also been the point person for the project, working with Rob. So let me see if I can share my screen here.
Well, I actually have it, don't we?
So yeah, I think we got that handout, and it's on the website.
One second here. Is that working?
I see it, yep.
See it, yeah.
Super, okay. So that's called the Twin States Clean Energy Link. And you were just talking actually a few moments ago about the Department of Energy. So I'll start there. At the end of October, the Department of Energy selected the Twin States project amongst several that were being evaluated across the country. And this was the only project that was selected in this first round in New England. So DOE, as you all know, these are not inexpensive projects. These are very complicated and costly projects to get built. And so DOE, recognizing that in order to reach our renewable energy goals and decarbonization goals, that we need new transmission in many different parts of the country, including New England. So DOE selected this project, which means DOE is willing to consider basically buying into the project and owning some of the transmission rights on the project. So this basically helps commercialize the project and jumpstart it. Ultimately, they will then sell their rights in the project to somebody else that wants to basically use the capacity on the line and then use that money to help finance additional projects. So just general background on what the project is. It's about a 211-mile high voltage transmission line that will go through Vermont and New Hampshire. It's primarily going to be bringing down power from Hydro-Quebec, which could include obviously hydropower and some of the wind resources that they are developing. The project really is designed, in my mind, I think of it as a large battery, sort of a balancing resource. There are obviously times when we're unable to get the energy that we need from our renewable resources, and so we obviously need to have backup resources. This line would allow for hydropower to basically substitute for what we're currently using, which is natural gas as the backup resource. So obviously a cleaner fuel source. And as Senator Ingalls mentioned, I think the game changer when we were talking about, if you recall, and I'll mention this when we look at the map, the Granite State PowerLink project. This is probably going back into 2017, 2018. We were always thinking of these lines as bringing power to one direction down from Hydro-Quebec. This project will allow power to flow both ways. So if we are able to develop some of the offshore wind resources that we need, we know that there will be times of the year when they're producing enough that it exceeds the demand in New England. So power can be sent back north to Quebec, which allows them to basically hold back water and basically trade energy back and forth and balance these resources rather than having power coming one way. And that's a really significant change in the nature of what we've been talking about over the past, say, decade. And as you heard, the project is basically relying on existing rights of way through Vermont and our roadways. New Hampshire is using sections of road, and Orlando can give you more details. And then it goes into an existing overhead transmission corridor in New Hampshire where they're basically going to be reconductoring the wires there, not having to do any significant expansion of that corridor. So we have approximately 50 miles of new underground lines, and Rob went through those corridors. So I'll show you a map real quick. So you can see we do cross up in Canaan, come through the village, come through Canaan, and we're evaluating the routes there. Largely the project goes along Route 102 down to Lunenburg, where we are talking about a horizontal drill under the Connecticut River to go over into New Hampshire. And then we have an underground section in New Hampshire before it gets into the yellow section you see there, which is the overhead. Now, I'm sure some of you remember several years ago, we were talking about the Granite State project. We were considering doing a similar project to bring power down, but we were going to locate it in an expanded corridor in the so-called VETCO corridor, which is, think of the Velco corridor, the big overhead transmission line. What we learned in evaluating that project, and I'm sure most of you are certainly well aware of this, is that that corridor abuts the so-called former champion lands, which are now called the Kingdom Heritage lands. So those are working forest lands, that's the Conti Refuge, that's a West Mountain Wildlife Management Area. All those areas have conservation easements on them held by either the state or Vermont Land Trust or the Nature Conservancy or VHCB. It became very clear that trying to expand that corridor, which would have required amending those conservation easements, which basically currently would prohibit these types of projects, was going to be difficult, to say the least, if not impossible. So when we started evaluating the need for a transmission line, we decided to look at a different route, and that's ultimately how we selected this route. We thought it, quite frankly, was create the least amount of aesthetic disturbance and certainly environmental disturbance. And in our conversation so far with the Agency of Natural Resources, which was a key stakeholder and gave us a lot of feedback, they're very pleased that we're looking at burying the transmission line. As you know, it's far more expensive to do a project this way, but it certainly is going to have far less impact than an overhead line, which would have, in this case, required an extensive amount of tree clearing all the way through that corridor. So I just wanted to give you that as background, because I'm sure Senator Kitchell, I remember having conversations with you about this project. Same thing with Senator Mazza. This is going back probably to 2017, 2018. So these are estimates of the benefits in Vermont. You can see the average number of jobs per year during construction, and the total investments in Vermont. These are things like construction materials that would need to be procured, as well as labor costs. The GDP is the additional dollars that are generated by having this project being built in Vermont. The $51 million, and Senator Perchlik, given your background in energy markets, will be of interest. Having a new transmission line bringing this power down from Quebec and injecting that into the New England market basically has a price suppression effect in the whole market in New England. So this is Vermont's slice of basically the sort of energy benefit that ratepayers would see, because otherwise prices would basically be higher when you've got new supply of this volume coming down into the market. It has a price suppression effect. So that's what that $51 million represents. I think a number of you probably are also aware we've signed an agreement with the NVDA for $20 million to provide funding for their loan and grant programs.
That, Warren, is that 40 over, like, when you say the life of the project, is that 20 years, 40 years?
I'm trying to remember. I want to say in this case it's I can get back to you. I think it's 32, but let me get back to you. But it's in that 30 to 40 range. I know it's slightly less than 40, but I can't remember precisely the number. I think it's 32. The property tax revenues, that represents approximately I think it's somewhere in the range of, it'll be on the next slide. Obviously each town will be slightly different, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of $500,000 to $600,000-$700,000 per town, and there's 7 towns. Do you have a question? Sorry.
You're wondering about the like of, are they pilots or are they actually evaluation?
No, when we get into property taxes and what, so much of property taxes goes into the ed fund, these side agreements, are these side agreements with the towns? Because what property property outside the right of way would be subject to property tax?
Well, this is property tax that even if we're in the right of way, would be going to the town. So we're not talking about this number is based on if the project's entirely in the right of way, and not any property valuations that would occur basically on town land or something like that would be outside of that right of way, if that makes sense.
And the 20 million, not the 20 million, the property tax, the 160 million over the life is based on your valuation of the equipment. Like it would be a normal property valuation formula.
Correct.
You're not looking at doing pilots or something.
Not to my knowledge. And then the last number, which is probably the most relevant, and again, I will caveat that this is an estimate. So it's timely that Rob has some ideas and figures in mind that he's going to share this week. This is our first ballpark estimate. I think it's probably a conservative number, but this is our estimate based on looking at other projects for the lease payments to VTrans. So I'm sure that number will change. And Orlando, who's on the screen here with me, and Rob, I'm sure have a lot to talk about this week. But nevertheless, the number is obviously substantial.
Okay, Senator Chittenden has a question.
So this is really helpful, and I appreciate the economic valuation of the benefits. What I don't see on this list, but I'm curious to hear your reaction to, I also interpret this as a benefit to Vermont is having some resiliency to our energy network as we are increasingly putting more demand on it, and also drawing from the hydropower that's up in on the Canadian side. That too has resiliency in times of reduced sun visibility for our solar panels. Would you argue that that's also a benefit? Vermont is increasing both the capacity, resiliency, and reliability for our electric network with this project.
What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's really the reason why we need additional transmission in Vermont. Is if we're going to try and meet our renewable energy targets and our carbon reduction targets in the region, you have to have substantial and, as you put it, resilient backup resources. And I've heard that there's at least a need for 2 to 3 projects in New England to support the renewable energy growth. So you're right. This type of resource obviously it's dispatchable, it's extremely reliable, and it's basically that balancing resource. So that's you're exactly right.
And that could be part of their 51 million savings, because some of that can show up in rates.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Senator Perch. Like having that additional energy into the New England market basically suppresses the wholesale energy prices. There obviously are additional carbon reduction values, and I can certainly provide that to the communities or to the committee as well.
I think it's really important to keep that in mind. So I'd include it in your benefits slide, because the reason to get the public monies involved with this is to have public resiliency in the network that we're all going to be relying upon over the next 30 years.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
So these are specific Northeast Kingdom community benefits. I've mentioned the $20 million with the NVDA. Here's again, sort of the more specific breakdown on property tax revenue. Some of the other things that I want you to be aware of that we're doing is we are talking with Vermont Electric Co-op to figure out different ways to provide direct rate relief to NEK residents, particularly along the community route, the project route. We have been having extensive conversations with the NEK Collaborative, Rural Edge, and others to look at other community benefits. What we've been hearing from them, and these are things that you know very well: shortages with housing, difficulty attracting labor because of lack of housing. So these are groups that we're talking with, seeing how the project can also help the area. Senator Kitchell, you mentioned sort of agreements with each towns. We are continuing to have conversations with each of the route communities to figure out specific benefits. A good example is the last bullet point. The Department of Energy put out another opportunity for communities that would be hosting some of these transmission projects, and we worked with the NVDA for an additional benefits package, particularly that would benefit Canaan, and then all of the different communities. We've heard from VEC and others that there's a need for what I'll call resiliency hubs, places that when power is out or there are other sorts of emergencies, places where communities can go, where they have backup power, they have resources there. And then also the Essex County Courthouse, which we've heard many times is in desperate need of some upgrades.
So you applied for that, you haven't heard back on that?
Correct. So I'm happy to take questions either now or anytime afterwards. You obviously can reach out to me at any time. I'm going to turn it over to Orlando, because my sense is that you're very interested in the transportation and construction component. So Orlando, just tell me and I'll advance the slides for you, and certainly introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Orlando Martinez. I am a project manager here at National Grid, and I've been working on this project from the very beginning of when we started thinking about this idea of trying to bring additional power from Quebec. So I'm glad to be able to speak to you today, and thank you so much for this opportunity to allow us to do that. And I think, like what Rob mentioned earlier, we're very appreciative of the fact that Rob and his team, Teresa Gilman, as well as Nate Covey and Nick Work, have been working with us on the different aspects of the project as it relates to the engineering and design and just assessing the conditions out in the field. And they've been very, very helpful. So we're very appreciative of the input that we have gotten from them. Uh, I wanted to talk a little bit about the construction part of the project. And here in this particular slide, you could see the different pieces of what needs to be done in the project. In this case, we are, and this it shows going into the city, but as into a town, in the middle of town here on the street. As we talked earlier, as Rob mentioned, the exact route has not yet been selected, and there are places where we will be in the road because we're trying to avoid certain environmental impacts. There are other areas where we're not going to be on the road at all. But as you could see, the process is that there's excavation that takes place in case we need to make sure that traffic is maintained. We use steel plates. I think folks might have seen those in other areas. The trench itself is not very wide. I think that Rob mentioned, that the right of way is about 30 rods. This is going to be about 3 to 4 feet wide. It's not going to be a very big trench when we're doing trenching. And we're going to be using a combination of trenching as well as using horizontal drills where it's necessary to avoid impacts to streams and et cetera. But this gives you an idea of what the construction would look like and going through any particular area and the equipment that we would use to be able to get that done. Our goal is to try to get through specific areas rather quickly so that way we don't disturb traffic too much in a particular area.
And is it just, are you pouring concrete over the conduit or is the conduit in?
Yes. Yes, we are. And this particular slide that Warren just put up kind of gives you an idea of what the subsurface is going to look like. So as you can see here, the trench is, roughly 2 to 3 feet wide, but it'll probably be a little bit wider than that. In this particular case, what we're looking at is having conduit that is about 2 conduits that are 8 inches in diameter, and then the electric cables will go inside of those conduits. And then we'll have two smaller conduits above those that will be used for communications equipment for us being able to communicate with the sources in Canada. That way, we understand if there's any issues, et cetera. We can communicate with each other and deal with those. Those 4 conduits that you see there are encased in concrete. And above that, we'll have usually some kind of thermal fill to make sure that that any heat that is generated by the cables is dissipated. And then up towards the top, we will also use, we could potentially use fill that is from the roadside if it's appropriate. We check to see what the technical specifications are of the whatever is excavated out. And if it meets the criteria, then we'll reuse it. If not, then we will bring in our own fill to make sure that the properties, the strength of the road is maintained, as well as the protection of our cables as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
And here's some pictures of what these look like. Especially if you look at the middle picture on the top row, you see that what the trench looks like. Then you go immediately to the left of that top row, you see what it looks like with the conduits in place. And then on the bottom row, you'll see the cable reels that are used when we are actually installing the electric cable. And the way this works is that we will have several years of throughout the line. And I think that Rob mentioned that in total between Vermont and New Hampshire, we're looking at 75 miles, 50 miles in Vermont, 25 miles in New Hampshire. And we are looking for about a 5-year time period. We are going to be abiding by our plan is to abide by the moratoriums that have been established by both VTrans in Vermont and the New Hampshire Department of Transportation as well. I know not allowing construction during certain times of the year. So we're going to be limited in our construction season. So we are trying to make sure that we do this as quickly as possible, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we are safe and that we're doing all the things properly so that this asset will be in operation for a long, long time. So as you can see here, what's the finished product? Once we are done, it's repaved. You can see the manhole cover that you see here on the lower corner, on the lower row on the right-hand side. You can see what it ultimately would look like. Any questions on the construction process?
No. Thank you. All good.
All right, great, thank you. I think we have one more slide to show you on the construction, which is how we do directional drills. And this is a very interesting piece, how we would go underneath the Connecticut River. And
I'm trying to advance the slide, but for some reason it's not advancing.
I think
We
it's
have,
because you're using a pointer mode. I think you're on pointer mode, my friend.
But you can go ahead, Orlando. We have paper copies here as well.
Okay.
Oh, okay, great.
So we can see what you want to talk about.
Okay.
Okay, so when we're going underneath the Connecticut River, we first bring a driller into a pilot hole that goes underneath it, and if you see on that slide, you see a little boat that's floating on the water. That boat is to show that there's equipment there, sort of help guide the drilling equipment, so that we know where we're directing it and where we're going. And ultimately, the pilot hole is drilled. It takes us to the other side. There are locations on either side of the river. And then once we do that, we come back and we do sort of like a reaming to widen that particular first pilot hole. And then on the last go round, we basically pull the conduit underneath the river. Now, sometimes depending on what kind of rock we find underneath the river, if there's rock there, what we'll do is instead of installing it in conduit, we will just use the rock as protection for our cables. We usually, but it just depends on what we find underneath the river. But our preference is always to protect our cables and put that conduit in place. But that's how we would go under. Anytime we have to do a directional drill, in this case, I know the biggest directional drill we will have will be across the Connecticut River, and that gives you an idea of the process, what equipment we use, etc. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. I thought I might also just give the committee a sense of the timeline of the project, because that's probably important. Right now, we are still doing field work, as you heard. The idea is that we would be applying for our A&R and DEC permits over probably the latter half of this year. We would expect to be filing a CPG application at the PUC probably in the second or third quarter of 2025. And then hopefully beginning construction in summer of 2026, going through either 2030 or 31 with a commissioning timeline of probably 2031. So you can see we're still fairly early in the process. We're still doing field work and getting ready to apply for those state level permits really over, I would say, the coming 12 to 18 months. So I just wanted you to understand that timeline, as well as this spring, I would say late winter, spring, going back out to the communities. We've spent a lot of time this past summer and fall at select board meetings, at doing open houses, at meeting with all sorts of stakeholders up and down the route communities. So that work will continue through the next year. So still early on in the process, quite a bit to go, but
And this,
a lot of
the lease for the right of way is one component of the community benefit plan, or is the community benefit plan separate than the lease payment?
It's separate. It's completely separate. It's again, NVDA is a component of that, but there's funds that we have that really have yet to be allocated, and those are ongoing discussions with the communities.
And that's something you have to file with DOE, the community benefits plan?
Well, that's been part of explaining that was part of our what we were doing, and quite frankly, admitting that some of this is still very much under development because we really want to get that feedback from the communities to know what they need. So
At one point, it is like, I guess the question is, that's not like an official document, like what the project's community benefit plan is that you have to submit to do DOE as part of the process, or is it just something you kind of negotiate as you go town by town?
It's both. It's like DOE want to know what is the plan for community benefits. So we've laid out what we're doing now and what that ongoing process is. I think all of that will come together when we file our CPG application before the Public Utility Commission, because as you know, they ultimately, their decision is this in the public interest? Is this benefit the state of Vermont? So that my hope and expectation would be that all of those pieces are wrapped up and are part and parcel of our CPG application in 2025.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because that's where all that information came out with the other projects proposals in the CPG process.
Right.
Okay, and then is there any connection to Velco? You're not touching the transmission lines. You're basically just doing your own transmission line. So
correct.
There isn't a connection to Velco.
There's not necessarily a physical connection, but we are talking with Velco, obviously, as the transmission owner in Vermont, who is then owned by all the distribution utilities. We are looking for ways to partner with Velco to make sure that additional benefits flow to Vermont ratepayers. So those are also ongoing discussions.
Okay. Well, great. We're looking forward to updates as the project goes along. This is an important part for Essex County for sure, but also for the state.
No, appreciate it, and happy to update you and members of the committee obviously anytime.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you both. Good to see you guys both again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
As well.
Okay, unless there's any other commentary, we